first one is Ivan Drucker with networking your PC or Mac to your Apple II. Thanks, Ivan.
Kansas City! No. Woo! Any Apple II fans in the house? No. Okay, so yes, as you have figured out from the slide from the session description, this session is all about networking your Apple II in a modern networking environment. Some of you may have tried this and struggled with it. Some of you may have not ever attempted it or occurred to you that it could be done, but it can, is the good news. So this session probably won't be end-to-end. I think there will probably be a lot of questions, so I'll probably leave some time at the end just for, shooting questions around. I think I got interested in this about, I don't know, before the last KFest ended, actually, probably about 16 months ago, because it just interested me that it would even be possible to sort of, I mean, I know that, the GS is a somewhat more modern computer, but when I sort of, learned of products like the ultra-rare Ethernet card that never got released, I didn't know if there were, and I also knew there was the Ethernet card, which allows you to put a 2E on an Ethernet network. So, by the way, interrupt me at any point. There's sort of a lot of detail that I'm not going to try to get into unless you want to hear it, but please ask if anything is unclear. So, anyway, so I thought, oh, Ethernet card, that'd be cool, because I'm kind of an 8-bit guy. And basically, on an 8-bit computer, that card is useful in exactly 2 applications, one of which you don't want to run more than once, that being Contiki. And if anybody's involved with that, my apologies. The other is ADT, for which it is ADT Pro, for which it is in fact very useful. But nonetheless, I wanted something that could interact more generally with my Mac. So I looked into and I'd already kind of been down this road a little bit because I have a classic Mac, or a Color Classic, and it has some of the same kind of challenges. It was challenges as the Apple II computers do in terms of adapting them from the networking that existed at the time to the networking that's used today. Basically, I just wanted an easy way of getting files back and forth with my Mac without having to plug things in. And so I started doing some homework. So there are 2 Apple IIs, or 2.5 if you count the Mac LC with the 2E card. There are which can support any kind of networking via expansion. The Apple II GS, like Macs of its time, actually has Apple Talk networking built in and Local Talk networking built in. Normally, those ports are used for the printer or an external modem. Obviously, not much these days, but maybe. But like Macs at the time, those can also be used for networking to other computers to share files with them. And then it turns out that, and where's Exhibit A here? The Apple IIe has a card that I learned of called the Apple IIe Workstation card. This is made by Apple, and it in fact gives your Apple IIe 2 8-pin ports, one of which can be used for local talk networking, which at the time you would have used to connect it to the kind of daisy chain local talk network you would find in your average school lab full of Macs. There was no way of serving files directly from an Apple II to Macs, but Apple IIs could be clients to to servers, to files being served off of Mac computers. So that got me curious as to, okay, well, that's some kind of networking. Is there some way of making it work with current computers? Is there some way of adapting it, et cetera, et cetera? And that began me down a long odyssey of all kinds of minutia. So I'll explain that as I go, but what you will see today is, in a nutshell, a demo of how file sharing can work with an Apple IIe and an Apple IIgs, and in fact, not just sharing files, but booting the whole computer over an operating system that comes over the network. So network booting the computer. And to illustrate that point, neither of these computers have drives attached to them at all. And then it also is to announce, I guess a release, a product would be an overstatement, of a free solution I wanted to put together, and so that the somewhat arduous task of setting up a server which then an Apple II can connect to could be easy the Apple way. So that actually isn't going to happen today, but based upon interest, that'll probably, determine how motivated I am to get off my ass and finish it. I actually was hoping to introduce yet another aspect of that today, but I will get to that. So anyway, let's. The slides are really boring. I am not really a graphics type person, and so use your imagination. Okay, so in order to turn your Mac or your Windows computer, neither of which speak any kind of networking that an Apple II can communicate with natively, you can use a virtual machine running Linux. Because Linux is the one current day operating system that, if you can adapt the cables, still can talk to an Apple II. And that's true of Linux running inside of virtualization programs such as Oracle VirtualBox, which is free, but also VMware and Parallels. I have tried it with those, and they work. They do not work over Wi-Fi. You have to be physically connected on a cable. But if you natively install Linux on a computer, and you, on a Mac anyway, and you go to an Apple airport, actually you could serve over Wi-Fi too. That actually works. So the ingredients are an Apple IIgs, or an enhanced IIe with the Apple II workstation card, a local talk to Ethernet bridge. I will talk to you about that more in depth, but basically that is a device like this, which has local talk and Ethernet. I'm going to clarify what all these terms mean because they're named very confusingly. But basically, it adapts the physical cabling used by an Apple II and older Macs to modern Ethernet networking. And a modern Mac or PC, as we discussed, or probably even a not-so-modern one. In what I will be distributing, because it's free, I made it run on Oracle VirtualBox because everybody likes free. And I wanted to have a way of doing this that was easy for people to be able to do without having to it cost anything, apart from whatever hardware you have to buy to make it go. And then finally, the package I will be putting together called A2 Server, which will be at my website, but if you go there today, you will merely find Slammer, which is what was there last year. Yeah?
Using VirtualBox 4 or later means you have to have at least Leopard or Snow Leopard.
That may be.
I think, because I have...
You certainly will need an Intel Mac. So that pretty much only rules out Intel Macs on Tiger.
I have Tiger and the 10411.
There's no reason why you shouldn't be able to do this on VirtualBox 3 or an older emulator. It's just, I mean, I just didn't test it that way.
Right, 3.0.1.
Yeah. Okay. So, and so A2 Server, I am going to deliver as a virtual appliance. For those not familiar with that term, that basically means a completed download representing the entire PC and the hard disks pre-configured, ready to go, ready to turn on and boot up, that you just plug right into VirtualBox, and essentially you download it and turn it on. You don't have to configure anything, hopefully. It rarely works out that way in the real world, but I'm trying to figure out how to minimize that as much as possible. Okay, so here is a very crude diagram of how the cabling works. So on the left you have your Apple IIe or IIgs connected by a local talk cable. So for those of you who used Macs in the mid-90s, I mean, you probably are familiar with local talk cables. They usually are little beige boxes like this, connected by a standard phone wire. These used to be used in Mac labs all over the place, using the built-in networking that Macs had, and they can be daisy-chained. So you can actually have multiple Apple IIs all on the same network, rather than needing a transceiver for each one. They can all be on the local talk network, which then gets adapted to the Ethernet network. We're not going to be quite so fancy today. You can also, if you're just going between your transceiver and a single Apple II, you can use just a regular image writer serial cable. That works too. Then that goes to the local talk bridge, like I described, and then that goes to the router or switch on your network, which then goes to your modern computer, connected via Ethernet cable. And you actually could go directly from the bridge to your computer. Depending upon your setup, you might need a crossover cable to do that. But the whole point, presumably, is that your computer's already on your network, and you would like your Apple II to be as well. Now, mind you, we are strictly talking about doing this for sharing files. This does not in any way bring any aspect of the internet to your Apple II. Okay, a II server, what is it? So, as I explained, it is a pre-made virtual machine distributed as a VirtualBox appliance. It comes ready to share files on the network to Apple II, Mac, and Windows clients running. Actually, I take that back. I shouldn't say Windows clients. Apple II and potentially. Oh no, you know what? Sorry, I didn't sleep a lot last night. No, I meant actually Apple II, Mac, and Windows clients. Apple II will connect with its older networking, and Mac and Windows can connect with their current day networking. So in addition to, so your Mac will be able to log into the server just as your Apple II will be. They're just different computers logging into the same server. It will be very easy to download, because I can't distribute anything copyrighted or that isn't licensed for distribution. In the download, I'm going to make it as easy as possible to, once you download it, to get what you need to from the internet and have it self-configured to be able to boot ProDOS 8 over your network without any drives. And for the moment, GSOS netbooting requires installed disks, and then once you go through that process once, then you can netboot onto GSOS as well. I was hoping to have that fixed before this particular, or developed, I should say, before this particular session, but didn't quite get it done in time. This is maybe more detail than is necessary, but I'll go through it quickly. The gist of it is that in order to set up the server with, to be able to boot GSOS over a network, you first need to go use your 2GS installer disk set, create one of the custom install options, which is a network installer floppy. You boot that, and then from that you log into the server, specify the server as the target for your install, and then another one of the custom installs is network server startup. I am working on a way to have that all be able to be done with a single command within Linux, hopefully. But it's taking some work. It has resulted, what I have gotten done so far, though, somewhat interestingly, is I have now written a utility in Linux that will take the entirety of a ProDOS disk and a disk image stored in Linux, such as the installer disk, for example, but it could be any of them, and it will copy all of the files and folders, including forked files, such as resource forks, in such a way that they'll be ready to go on the shared server. So it's actually kind of cool. Do you need me to stop and explain anything at this point? Is it clear, more or less, what I'm talking about? Awesome. Okay, so why Linux? Because Mac OS X can't do it. Even though some older versions of Mac OS X did have AppleTalk networking, it still was the aspects of the protocols that it required TCP/IP, which is in no way supported on the Apple II, so there was no way for an Apple II to connect directly to Mac OS X server. Same goes for iOS. Now, the software that I'll be mentioning that provides the file sharing is called NetAtalk, And NetAtalk is available for iOS, and people do install it to be able to browse the file system over the network. On their Mac, they can just browse the folders on their iPhone, which is cool. Can't work with an Apple II, though, because that all happens over TCP/IP, and Mac OS X and iOS cannot provide Apple Share over AppleTalk, which is the older networking that the Apple II requires. Windows, there have been, I don't know if they're still around, a variety of very expensive third-party products that allow you to attach older Macs and therefore presumably Apple IIs to your network. So I didn't really take that very seriously as an option. But Linux still has an AppleTalk stack in it, and that means that the Apple II can connect to it when NetAtalk is installed on it. Okay, so what are the components of A2 Server? I built it on top of Ubuntu Server, so rather than the full edition with the GUI and everything pretty that you don't need to use and takes up 10 times as much space and processor resources, it's just a server. So it just boots into command line Linux, and from there you'll be able to do most of what you need to, but really you should be able to just boot it up, turn it on, and not even log in, and you should be serving files. It should be fairly turnkey. So, and that's based on, it could be any Linux, but I did it on Ubuntu Server. NetAtalk is the package that I mentioned to you that provides Apple Share file sharing for Unix-based computers. I had to compile it with various obscure flag set and certain libraries made available and stuff like that in order to actually make it log-inable from an Apple II and network bootable from an Apple II. There's the features are in there, but there's little to no documentation on it. There's a package called Avahi, which allows the Linux server to show up in your list of servers in Mac OS X automatically along your other servers. It's the same, it's Bonjour, so it's the same thing that causes the other Macs on your network to show up. Samba, which is the protocol that Windows computers use to share files, so that way a Windows computer could log in to the A2 server. Some utilities, such as the Unarchiver. If you haven't seen the Unarchiver, it's a really cool free app for the Mac that sort of like stuff that Expander used to, but supports even more obscure older formats, including the disk doubler format that Apple has on their website for their Apple IIgs software disk images. Anyway, there's a Linux build of it, so that's in there, along with a couple other things. And then I wrote a bunch of scripts to make this easy and not painful.
Question.
Yes?
On your NetAtalk build.
Yep.
So do you have a package of that for those of us that want to set it up
No.
on?
But I have explicit instructions on how to build it yourself if you wish to.
Okay.
I actually wrote up a very,
Well, you should.
I wrote up, I'll show you, and I'm happy to send it to you. It's a very detailed step-by-step on exactly, if you want to do it from scratch, exactly what you would need to do to set it up, and then if you have questions about it, you can ask me. It gets it up to the point of sharing files. I haven't actually documented all the netboot stuff, but
Okay.
it's that most of the battle is fought on the. Yes.
You were talking about the need to have a TCP/IP stack.
No, not a TCP/IP stack. It's not.
Oh.
It's not used at all. We are not using TCP/IP networking at all in this scenario. Apple. So I have another slide on this in a minute. But basically, running alongside TCP/IP, or even completely in the absence of TCP/IP, is AppleTalk networking, and that's what the Apple II is going to speak to A2 servers.
So that's why Spectrum Internet Suite wasn't relevant.
Correct.
Okay.
Doesn't Apple call it like EtherTalk or something for that particular part of it?
AppleTalk over Ethernet, as opposed to local talk cabling, Apple did call EtherTalk, yeah.
Okay.
That's what this slide is all about. So, all these names kind of sound the same, but local talk is a physical cable. It's the phone wire cable that I showed you, or originally it actually was a proprietary cable that looked like an ADB cable, but that quickly got adapted by third parties into something much cheaper, that being phone wire. So local talk is the physical cabling, just like 10 base T Ethernet or 100 base T Ethernet is the physical cabling that you use today. So we have to convert. So one aspect of the conversion is converting the physical cabling from what the Apple II is using, local talk, to what you're using today, which is ether talk, and that is the role of a transceiver. Then there's Apple Talk. So Apple Talk is the network data and if there's any network administrators in the house, I know this is a somewhat inaccurate description, but it's a network data protocol, very much analogous to TCP/IP. Just as TCP/IP is data arranged in packets for exchange over a network between computers, so is Apple Talk. It's just a different protocol, which is no longer supported in any way by Apple. It was formally excised in its entirety in Snow Leopard. There was a last vestige in Leopard for some old printer support. Okay, so that's Apple Talk. Then there's Apple Share. So Apple Share is a file exchange protocol. And Apple Share originally was implemented over Apple Talk, which could have been over either local talk cabling or Ethernet cabling. Confusing, right? And then later, Apple replaced Apple Share over Apple Talk with Apple Share over Ethernet. Apple Share over TCP/IP, which could also be over local talk, but was usually over Ethernet cabling. But my point is that the Apple Share file sharing protocol is not in any way formally related to the Apple Talk network protocol underneath it, which is not formally related to the physical cabling that you use. And as you mentioned, Apple Talk over Ethernet is sometimes referred to as Ether Talk. And are you confused yet?
Yeah.
If you want me to go over any of this stuff now or later, I'm happy to. Okay, so maybe this would be, before I kind of go through a lot of the details, maybe this would be a good time for you to see it in action for a minute, just to break things up here. So let me fire up VirtualBox. So this is VirtualBox, which, as I said, is a fairly nice free virtualization package. I wouldn't use it for deep integration with my Mac environment, but I would use one of the commercial ones instead. But in this case, we don't need integration at all. So I'm going to click Start, and you're going to see a fairly Linuxy-looking world running in the window. So, yes, sir?
Which version of VirtualBox is this?
4.0.12. Interestingly, for what it's worth, there was a seeming bug in 4.04 through 4.0.10 that made the CPU on my MacBook Air run away like crazy. But I was pleased to see that 12 doesn't cause that to happen. It has worked in every version I've tried since 3.2.8. So, all right, it takes about 2 minutes to start up. It normally doesn't do all that, but something is screwy. Anyway, so we are now, turning on the Linux server. Once it is turned on, in fact, let me. Is this off now? The Apple IIe? Yeah, it is. So what I'm going to do is I am going to install the Apple IIe workstation card in Peter's Apple IIe. Thank you, Peter. And
Identify what it has in it.
he has a RamWorks 2 80-column card and a Disk 2 card with no drive attached to it. The card typically goes into slot 1, 2, or 7. That's because in addition to the local talk port, it also provides you with a serial port, so it can actually replace a super serial card if you're using it for printing. It can also go in slot 7 if you wanted to scan and boot over the network by default. But for the time being, it doesn't matter, so I'm going to drop it in slot 4. Okay, and then let's kick this up. Right, that was why I had some blood, but yeah, we can do it either way. Okay, I'll switch it. Where is the other end of my? Oh yeah, so we're plugging into the 2GS at the moment. We'll plug it into the 2E right now. So I'm now going to attach. So this local talk cable is this is an aside, but I'm actually, I'll mention this in a minute. I'm actually using an old Mac as my Ethernet transceiver. It has both Ethernet and local talk built into it, and therefore can be used as a bridge between the two. And in fact, that is the best readily available, inexpensive solution for 2GS users. For 2E users, several of the I'll go over the pros and cons of each, but 2GS users have fewer options. Okay, so now we have us cabled up, and so now A2 server is running. It's waiting for a login, but you don't need to log in. The service is running, and you don't need to do anything. And you can minimize this window or put it in the background or whatever. So let's see. All right. So now, all right, we're going to try booting from the card. It's going to work. Cross your fingers. Come on, you can do it. It does sometimes take a minute to catch. People in demos always say that.
From trying to boot up somebody's machine in Iowa or
Yeah, that should do it. I hope. Let's try again. That's better. All right. So it is loading ProDOS, and then the Apple File Server logon program from A2 server, running in Linux right now. Now, if you don't want a netboot environment, there's a disk called the Apple IIe Workstation Card disk that you can boot, and it provides you with this same login to allow you to log in for file sharing purposes, but not booting the whole OS over the network. But I thought it was cooler to boot the OS over the network. So I set it up so that guest is fine because I'm not too worried about security on my Apple II, but your mileage may vary. You can turn off guest login and have strictly registered usernames and passwords if you want. All right, let's log in as a guest. Uh-oh, contact the network administrator. This path does not contain a ProDOS A startup application. That's because it is currently configured to boot a GS. So this is actually a good opportunity for me to give an example of the kind of thing I developed to make it easy to change that sort of thing, whereas it was in no way easy to do that before. What do I...
Your Mac might have gone to sleep.
Oh, it did? The nerve of it. I should plug it in. Or tell it to not sleep anymore. Yeah, I know. Okay, so we're still not looking at that. Okay, so by default in A2 server, the username is user1 and the password is Apple II. And obviously, if you do it yourself, you can make it whatever you want, but okay. So pretty typical Unixy looking world in there. So I'll make this even easier than it is now, but it's in development. I wrote a utility called make_AT_init. That's because that's the name of the file. In order to get any kind of net booting happening at all, if you could even get the NetAtalk software configured to be able to do it, you then need a very specifically formatted kind of binary file that has to exist in a specific folder hierarchy on the share volume with a specific name. That used to be generated by the Apple Share 3 software for Mac OS 7 that would run on a Mac, which was originally the intended server for an Apple II Netboot client. So I wrote a utility to make that to make that file so that you could actually netboot. So this is one of the biggest hurdles to clear if you even got the software running in the first place, was that then you don't actually have the file you need to make it happen without at least having a Mac first installed for you. In a Mac with that specific OS and configuration. Okay, so there's a usage screen. We are going to have it, I want to set it for guest. Okay, enter the ProDOS path. Default 0 to accept. A2 files basic system. I think that's there. A2 files A2. Okay, so now I changed the prefixes that the Apple II will, the startup program that the Apple II will use. What did I do?
You had to overwrite it.
I didn't what?
Once you know, it prompted you to overwrite the file.
Oh, no way. Somebody's paying attention.
The system administrator.
Okay, it has been overwritten. All right, so let's try again.
So that actually brings up a good question. Is
Yeah.
there a way to do both ProDOS 8 and GS Netboot on the same server?
That is a good question. The answer is probably, but I'd need to think about it.
Okay.
My guess is, let's talk about that later. I think there's probably a way to do it, but it would involve something a little custom on the Apple II side.
I wouldn't be doing it, but I was just wondering if it was possible.
Well, yeah, basically what happens is that it wants to either start up a ProDOS 8 app, or it wants to start up a ProDOS 16 app, or a GSOS app.
So you could do a ProDOS 8 app that calls the...
You'd have to do something like that. It's very picky on the GS side, because there's a network control panel on the Apple II GS which lets you choose whether or not you wanted to try to start up a ProDOS 8 app or a ProDOS 16 app. And so I'm guessing there's probably some way to write a hybrid app that'll work in either case that then launches the right thing, but I don't do any GS programming, so I don't know.
Like the basic system, and then just do a dash on the GSOS ProDOS.
I don't think it can. You dash from basic system to GSOS?
Because the ProDOS on
You
GSOS start this is an 8-bit program, which then loads start GSOS.
Maybe. I don't spend a lot of time on the 2GS, so I just don't know, but I would imagine it's an Apple II. There's always a way. All right, let's try this again. That would be beeping at you in the most annoying way right now.
Okay, so we have the ProDOS
If the speaker were attached. Okay, so it's looking around for the file server again. Remember, there are no drives attached to this Apple IIe. It's like a magic trick. Let's log in as a guest. Now launching startup path, A2 files basic.system. And there we are. And we can type path. And you are looking at a share volume running inside A2 server right now. And in fact, A2 is just a folder I've made to keep things neat, but the server is actually A2 files. And you can see there's a bunch of junk at the root, some of which is usually invisible when looked at on Mac. Yeah. So that is an Apple IIe booting over the network and logging into a shared file server and running on a Mac and running on an emulator in a Mac and sharing files. Pretty cool.
Yeah. So which old Mac did you use?
What's that?
What old Mac are you using to do the...
I currently am using a PowerBook 2400, which, by the way, if none of you have ever seen a 2400 before, you should come look at mine because I think it's the nicest laptop ever developed, and they made like 5 of them. So I mean, it's not that rare, but it was only sold in the U.S. and Japan, and just was a beautifully designed little machine. It was a sub notebook.
So are you needing to use like IP Netbooter or something on there? Or
Nope.
is that only
The question is, what am I using? There is a control panel on Apple's older software downloads page called Local Talk Bridge. It's got one button called on and off, and it just works. As long as your Apple Talk control panel is set to use Ethernet, whatever your Ethernet port is. In my case, it's a PC card because it's not built into the computer. Apple Talk points at Ethernet. You run Local Talk Bridge, and it just routes that out to the Local Talk port on your
IP
computer.
Netbooter is actually for sharing TCP/IP.
Right, that's very true. Yeah.
What version of Mac OS are you running on?
At the moment, I'm running 8.6, but I tested it on 7.6 and 9. I can't remember if I tried running 9 or not. But Local Talk Bridge was written for 7.1, so who knows if it works on 9, but probably.
Wasn't it written so you could run? I used it to run a printer when you couldn't run it.
That was what it was primarily intended for. Was that exactly? And then and until Snow Leopard came out, people still used an old Mac with Local Talk Bridge as a way of printing to their laser writers. But Snow Leopard banished Apple Talk networking once and for all, and therefore Local Talk Bridge was no longer useful. But it's useful for this. So, all right, I'll temporarily aside to this. So there are a lot. I had actually I've kind of become a transceiver collector as I've tried to figure out what works and what doesn't. So both of these are pretty nice. This one's made by Dana. It's the Etherprint. This one's actually the mini Etherprint. They have a much larger one called the Etherprint that does the same thing. There is one model of the larger Etherprint that doesn't have a 10-base T-port. Obviously, that's not the one you want, but all the others are fine. Works great on an Apple IIe. Works great to netboot a 2GS. If you boot from another disk and try to use the Apple Share control panel on the 2GS, which you'll see, it will crash when you use this. This is a Farallon Etherwave. They had later models called EtherMac that were more of a boring oval shape, but the same color. These also work great on a 2E. They work great on a 2GS for the first 2 minutes after boot, and then they just stop passing traffic. So, that is why if you are a 2GS user, you can buy a PowerBook 3400-200 on eBay for about $25 and install Local Talk Bridge on it, and that's going to be much more easily available and functional than any transceiver you're likely to find.
Have you tested this on a GatorBox?
I have not, because I've had a GatorBox on my eBay search for over a year and I've not seen one come up. So I am told that the GatorBox works great with the 2GS. Those who have used it swear by it, but for those who don't already have one, they appear to be rarer than many things. So, actually, you'll see there's a slide that we're going to cover that. Okay, let's go back to the slides for a minute.
Peter went back to sleep, looks like.
What was it supposed to? I guess the screen went to sleep, and that's still... Does that also turn off the external video?
Yeah, it shuts off video.
Okay, so as long as we're back here in Unix world, I'll just show those of you who are interested a couple of the other utilities. Whoops. I wrote this one called Get the Unarchiver in a single command that just goes and gets the Unarchiver, which can then unpack the distribution files from Apple Software Downloads website, which otherwise are in a long dead format called disk doubler that you would need a Mac to unpack. So that's kind of nice that you can do it right there in Unix. And then there's a script that you can run subsequently called, I'm going to write a single script so you don't need to do all these things. I'm going to unify all this. But there's one called install boot blocks. What that does is it downloads the right disk off of Apple's website, unpacks it with the Unarchiver, and then, because it's actually a Mac disk, it mounts it, it grabs the files it needs out of it, and puts it in the right places within NetAtalk so that you can netboot. Because you do need some stuff from Apple in order to be able to netboot, but fortunately it's on their website. So I wrote some stuff so that theoretically you could bare metal all of that. You just start with the Linux, you type a few commands, and then you're all set up for netbooting. Okay, so back to the slides, because they're so nice looking. All right, so this is sort of what I just went over. I can send you these details later if you want. But for an Apple IIe, you can use Farallon Etherwave, you can use Farallon EtherMac, which were also sold as iPrint. There's one model that is for connecting to serial printers, not local talk printers. That's the one you don't want. It's called the iPrint SL. The Dana Etherprint we just discussed. The Etherprint Plus is the one without the 10-base T-port, so don't get that. Cayman Gator box. I've never used one. People say they work. Or a Mac running local talk bridge. For the Apple II GS, so works that I can verify. The local talk bridge control panel on an old Mac works. Rumored to work as the Cayman Gator box. I haven't verified it myself. And works for Netbooting GSOS only as the Dana fingerprint, but does not work for using the Apple Share control panel from another machine.
Have you tried the Asante Talk?
Oh, thank you for mentioning that.
All right then.
The Asante Talk is the most widely and easily available transceiver. It sucks. You will notice that the letters of the word Satan are in the name Asante. It is one of the most non-deterministic computing devices I have ever used. One of the guys on CSA2, Jeff Body, did some analysis of it, and apparently what it does is it starts up, and it takes a look around the network, and if it doesn't find anything that's AppleTalk Phase 2, it falls back on Phase 1. But it's really incredibly persnickety, and just when you think you've got a reproducible sequence of events, it gives you the finger again. So I don't recommend it. I just torment it out of it. And then obviously, if you have a 2GS, then the EtherWave and Ethernet products are not winners either.
Oh, and also on the whole dash starting a S16 from within ProDOS 8,
yeah,
it just drops straight to the buy screen, and dash starting is the correct way because if you do it from within GSOS, it works fine.
Yeah, but the ProDOS file on a GSOS boot disk, the one that starts the whole boot process, is an 8-bit program.
I actually tried that, and it said it couldn't find start.gs.os.
Did you have to prefix that right?
All right.
It doesn't matter, yeah.
This sounds like a fun conversation to have later.
Yeah.
All right, so I'm happy to send them to you now, but I'll post the full instructions both for the user installation of the A2 server appliance, as well as the step-by-step if you want to build it yourself. It's not hard if you follow the steps. In fact, I wrote most of it so that it can just be actually run as a shell script. So these are various people who have helped me with this on the interwebs. Stephen Hirsch wrote some of the Apple II boot support stuff in NetAtalk 100 years ago, and still is very helpful today. And Jeff Body has really helped figure out some of the transceiver headaches. Tony has been great. I was briefly in contact with a guy named Peter Wong who got the GS, based on my 2E netboot instructions that I posted, an early version of which I posted on CSA2 a long time ago. He got working on his GS, and then I had to figure out how he did it. He didn't respond to my email after that. And CSA2 in general, and you, because actually being able to be here and present this is part of the motivation for doing it. Let me, before we go into sort of the post-game show, let's take a look at the GS netbooting. Okay, so GS is slow netbooting, so I'll take questions while it netboots. Thank you for the heads up, Andy. So now, it's worth pointing out that I pick it up and wave it, but it'd be a waste of time. There is not one card of any kind in this ROMO 3 2E, and that's totally sufficient. I'm sorry, ROMO 3 GS, and you don't need any cards in it to be able to boot it, which is kind of like magic. All right.
You can plug GSs into the video.
Oh, that's less hostile to the equipment. Yeah. These are just problems I'd like to solve. It'd be nice to figure out why the... We'll come back to this slide, actually. Okay, here we are. I actually didn't expect it to take that easily, but there you have it. So this is what the GS startup screen looks like when it boots over the network. It's got a little cursor animation, just like the old BBSs used to have. It's kind of nice. And then it goes through the same login process. Incidentally, this is kind of interesting. It loads these files called boot blocks, which are just executable code that sit on the NetAtalk server. You could go in there and hack your own code to make it do whatever you want to. as it boots over the network. All right. That is not the right keyboard. Now it's probably going to complain at us because we changed the startup disk.
Oh,
I keep waiting for it to not work. I thought you changed it to delete. It's not that good.
what causes that irregular color rate on it?
That's because it's connected via composite and not the RGB you would normally connect.
Okay.
Anyway, so this is going to take a while, but it works. That's cool. All right. Yes, sir.
Is the straight System 601 not modified?
What?
Is that just basic System 601?
Yes. It is the custom install that's the network startup disk install, but yes, it's the vanilla of that.
Nothing else, no additional extensions?
Nothing that custom install doesn't install. Correct. But it will not boot if you don't have the networking pieces that bit installs. Oh yeah, so then it boots that far, goes back to this. This is probably when it's going to complain about not finding a startup work, I guess. So anyway, one thing I'd really like to do is get this working on a network-attached storage drive. Most of those are based on Linux. To save space and keep things light, the ones I've seen don't compile in the AppleTalk stack. So again, no AppleTalk on those devices, but theoretically doable because people have been making those devices do entertaining things, and they're just little Linux computers. And that'd be sweet to have a little self-contained hard drive that can serve files to an Apple II. Meanwhile, we booted, so there you go. I'm not sure how.
Pretty sure when you did the changeover earlier, did your scripts and stuff,
I didn't,
and
so
you did a
apparently it's
directory,
possible.
there was a file called ProDOS8 on there. So I'm thinking maybe when
That was actually a folder that I made. So
Is it? Okay.
it wasn't that, but maybe.
Whatever you had set up as now, though, it boots a 2E into ProDOS 8 on a GS provider.
Let me just show you real fast for those who used a Mac back in the day. This will all look extremely familiar. You can see the blinking arrows in the corner, and then you do have an Apple Share control panel, and it brings up a chooser-like thing, which it will show you as being already logged into. But you could install, if you boot it from a hard disk, you could log in to the server as a secondary volume this way. So, all right. Any questions?
When you say you have no cards in the...
Come look, no cards.
Not even memory?
Well, it's a ROM 03, so it has enough memory to boot a naked GSOS.
All right.
One thing that you definitely do want to be aware of when doing this, I mentioned this before, but maybe since we can see it, it's better to show it. The network control panel controls whether or not a GS will try to boot up. Like, it is in some sort of exciting dual boot mode that I don't know how it's happening right now, but if you wanted the GS to boot up into basic.system, you would change it to start up with ProDOS 8, or you could choose any other ProDOS 8 app that way. Occasionally that can get you into trouble if, like, it's set for to boot into GSOS, and you don't have GSOS on your server yet, and then you've got a chicken and egg problem. But the solution to that is to make the network floppy disk, and then you can get to the network control panel to change it. One thing that I would love if one of you GS people would write is a little simple 8-bit app to actually change that in the battery RAM, because that would be, then you could boot to basic dot. And anyway, yes. Any other questions? Yeah.
Can you print from the GS?
That's a good question, and the answer is yes. If you have a local talk capable image writer, you can print from either the 2E or the GS, actually. I have never tried because I don't have one of those devices. But a local talk capable image writer, and I think one of the early laser writer models, is supported in even on the 2E.
So you can't print directly using your printer cable? You have to go through...
No. Right. It doesn't have any sort of sharing a serial printer and have a print spooler in it or anything like that. The printer has to be a networkable printer in the first place. Any other questions? Thank you. this was fun, and I've actually been looking forward to presenting this all year, and it was, I don't know why it always takes the last possible second when you have a whole year to do it, but it's the way it plays.
Files on your server from the GSOS?
Do I have what?
We're doing with the 280.
Yeah, oh yeah. Here, so if
You assume the OS is on it, but
you assume correctly. If we open up A2 files, you will see very familiar things. The A2 folder I created the Protoss 8 folder as well. The users is created by that utility of mine is necessary for the netbooting to be able to happen. Then the rest of it, lost and found, is common to Apple shared servers, and you should ignore it. And there's basic system icons and the system folder, which contains all the usual system folder goodness. One other thing I wanted to mention is, because I just got a chance to play around with it this morning, I tried out Rich Dreher's CFFA 3000 card, which he's selling here at the show, and it's just fantastic because I was able to install all of the System 6 disk images right here on the card, and they all mount on the 2GS desktop, and it just made installing multiple configurations a snap. So I can recommend it. All right, thank you very much.
We have a slight schedule change. The next session is going to be upstairs in the common area. We might need to bring a few chairs upstairs, but that's going to be Jeff Weiss's. Is that a 2GS in your pocket, or are you happy to see me?